June 24, 1941. Somewhere behind British lines in the Western Desert, a group of Allied mechanics gathered around a captured German armored car. The vehicle, once a proud part of the Afrika Korps, sat silent under the blistering desert sun. Its angular hull, painted in faded gray, glimmered faintly with sand-blown reflections. The men were curious. This machine had been touted as one of Germany's modern armored reconnaissance vehicles, the Sd.Kfz 222. Its sharp, geometric armor and open top turret made it look deadly, even standing still. But appearances deceived. One mechanic raised his Lee Enfield rifle, chambered a round of armor-piercing ammunition, and fired. The crack echoed across the desert. When they walked forward, they saw a clean hole punch straight through the side of the hull. The bullet had not deflected. It had gone through the armor as though the steel were paper. Another shot followed. Another hole. The supposed bulletproof German reconnaissance car, advertised in propaganda as invulnerable to small arms, had failed against an ordinary infantry rifle. The Sd.Kfz 222, Germany's standard light armored reconnaissance car, was built to look formidable. Its body was a collection of sloped steel plates welded into a diamond-shaped shell. The open top turret, protected by a wire mesh anti-grenade screen, housed a rapid-firing 20mm autocannon. It could reach speeds of 80 kilometers per hour, darting across open ground or city streets with astonishing agility. To German crews, it seemed the perfect blend of firepower and mobility, the ideal scout's vehicle. Yet beneath that aggressive design, the armor was little more than a thin shell. The crews believed it would save them. The reality was far crueler. Origins and restriction. To understand how the 222 came to be, one must return to the aftermath of the First World War. The Treaty of Versailles had crippled German military ambitions. It banned tanks outright and imposed strict limits on the size and composition of the German army. But clever engineers in the Reichswehr, and later the Wehrmacht, looked for loopholes. Armored cars were not specifically prohibited. If tanks were forbidden, then these vehicles could serve as their legal cousins, fast, lightly armored machines for reconnaissance and security duties. By the early 1930s, Germany's industrial base was recovering. Horch, a division of Auto Union, began experimenting with four-wheel drive chassis suitable for military use. The German army wanted a vehicle that could move ahead of armored divisions, locate enemy formations, relay intelligence, and withdraw before being destroyed. Heavy armor wasn't a requirement. Speed and maneuverability were. Doctrine dictated that reconnaissance units should see without being seen, fight only when necessary, and retreat when outmatched. The Sd.Kfz 222 was the final product of that philosophy. Introduced in 1937, it combined elegant engineering with dangerous optimism. Built on the Horch 801 chassis, it featured four-wheel drive and even four-wheel steering, a rare and sophisticated capability at the time. This system allowed it to execute extremely tight turns, ideal for scouting through narrow European villages or reversing away from ambushes. Manuals warned, however, that four-wheel steering was safe only at low speeds. Above 20 kilometers per hour, the car became unstable and prone to rollovers. The Germans invested considerable effort into shaping its armor. Angled plates gave the car a modern, futuristic look while theoretically increasing its effective protection by deflecting bullets. Its turret, a 10-sided, open top structure, offered good visibility for its two-man crew, the commander and gunner, while a mesh grenade screen prevented enemies from easily dropping explosives inside. At first glance, everything about the vehicle screamed innovation. In 1937, it looked ahead of its time. Power beneath fragility, under the hood sat a Horch V8 engine, available in two variants over the years, a 3.5-liter 75 horsepower unit in the early OSF, A, and a 3.8-liter 90-horsepower engine in the later OSF. B, for a light car weighing just under 5 tons, this gave brisk acceleration and a top speed impressive even by modern armored car standards. Crews praised the engine's smoothness, the gearbox's precision, and the reliability of the electrical system. No small feat in the dust and chaos of combat. But that mechanical excellence hid a fatal flaw. The armor, early production models, had 8 millimeters of rolled steel on all surfaces, including the front. That's about the thickness of 4 stacked credit cards, enough to stop pistol bullets or shell fragments, but not much else. German engineers rationalized the thinness. The vehicle's role was to avoid heavy combat, not survive it. Weight savings meant greater range, speed, and maneuverability. The slope plates, they argued, would increase the chance of deflecting incoming fire. Still, combat was unpredictable. In the field, reconnaissance units often found themselves ambushed or pinned down by infantry. The car that was never supposed to be shot at ended up being shot at frequently. Realizing this, Germany gradually upgraded the armor. By 1939, the frontal plate was thickened to 14.5 millimeters. Later versions introduced in 1942 boosted frontal armor to 30 millimeters. But the sides and rear, where most hits occur during retreats or flanking actions, remained dangerously thin. Thousands of early models with the 8 millimeter armor stayed in service throughout the war. To the German soldier, though, numbers mattered less than belief. Propaganda films and training manuals insisted the armor could withstand rifle fire. Crews were told their vehicles offered adequate protection for reconnaissance duties. Posters depicted bullets bouncing harmlessly from sloped armor plates. The illusion mattered. Courage depended on it. Baptism in Poland, the first major test came in Poland, September 1939. German reconnaissance units led the invasion, racing ahead of tank columns to locate weak points and identify enemy concentrations. The Sd.Kfz 2-22 performed flawlessly. Polish infantry, still relying on outdated weapons and limited anti-tank resources, could not stop the fast-moving scouts. The vehicles tore through the countryside, reporting back precise coordinates for artillery and tank units. To their crews, that the campaign proved everything the propaganda promised. The 222 was unstoppable. When the campaign ended in weeks, German officers praised the vehicle's reliability and its apparent invulnerability. The lessons they should have learned, that success owed more to enemy weakness than to superior armor. Went unnoticed. The illusion deepens. France 1940, next came France, May 1940. German blitzkrieg tactics shattered the French army in 6 weeks. Again, the reconnaissance cars were at the spearhead. They scouted bridges, flanked retreating units, and transmitted critical intelligence. French infantry rarely had time to prepare defenses before being bypassed entirely. The 222's mobility seemed miraculous. It darted through villages, dashed across open roads, and kept pace with advancing panzers. In truth, it was protected not by steel but by momentum. The French campaign unfolded so fast that few German reconnaissance vehicles ever faced sustained infantry fire. For the crews, the illusion of protection grew stronger. They believed their thin armor had saved them. Into the mountains in April 1941, the Balkans campaign extended the myth. Against Yugoslav and Greek forces still using World War I-era equipment, the 222 again performed well. The rough, mountainous terrain favored lightweight vehicles. Heavy tanks struggled, the nimble 222s thrived. Each victory reinforced a false confidence, the belief that speed could always outpace danger. By spring 1941, reconnaissance crews had fought in Poland, France, and the Balkans without catastrophic losses. They trusted their vehicles completely. Then came North Africa, a battlefield that would expose every weakness. The Desert Beckons, the Africa Corps, was born in response to Italy's failures in Libya. Officially formed on January 11, 1941. It arrived in Tripoli in February under the command of Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. His mission was to stabilize the front and push the British back from Cyrenaica. The desert, however, was unlike any battlefield Germany had known. Vast, sun-scorched plains stretched for hundreds of kilometers. There was no cover, no shade, and no infrastructure. Temperatures soared above 50 degrees Celsius by day and dropped near freezing at night. Fine sand crept into every joint, clogging air filters, seizing gearboxes, and grinding down moving parts. Fuel and water convoys struggled across endless tracks, vulnerable to air, attack, and mechanical failure. For vehicles like the Tu-22, the desert was both paradise and nightmare. On hard sand and gravel flats, it could reach full speed, its suspension gliding over ripples of dust. The open visibility allowed long-range reconnaissance. But visibility was a double-edged sword. Once spotted, the 222 had nowhere to hide. The car's limited fuel range, roughly 300 kilometers under ideal conditions, became a crippling constraint in the vast desert where supply lines stretched thin. Still, at first, the 222 seemed to fit the desert war perfectly. In early operations, German recon units shocked the British with their speed and boldness. They raided supply depots, mapped enemy defenses, and ambushed convoys. The Aufkl Rungsabteilung III, Rommel's reconnaissance battalion, arrived in Africa in February 1941 and immediately began operations. Photographs from that spring show Tu-22s racing across dunes, their crews perched high, goggles glinting in the sun. To many, the machine symbolized the new German style of warfare: fast, aggressive, confident. Operation Crusader and the turning point. By late 1941, the illusion began to crack. The British launched Operation Crusader in November 1941, aiming to relieve Tobruk and drive the Germans back. The desert erupted in confusion, swirling tank battles, long-range duels, endless movement. When the smoke cleared in December, the battlefield was littered with wrecked vehicles, many of them German reconnaissance cars. Some had been destroyed by anti-tank guns. Others had simply broken down or run out of fuel, their thin armor offering no help against exhaustion or mechanical failure. British recovery teams eagerly collected the abandoned machines. Among their prizes were several Sd.Kfz, Tu-22s, some damaged, some intact. The vehicles were soon brought behind the lines. British engineers and mechanics, curious about their enemy's technology, began informal tests. They wanted to know what these machines were truly made of, literally. The captured Sd.Kfz, 222 armored cars sat under canvas tarps behind British lines, waiting to be examined. Their wheels were half buried in sand, paint-chipped, and faded from the harsh desert sun. A team of British mechanics and ordnance experts gathered around one of the vehicles, notebooks and calipers in hand. The smell of oil and burnt metal hung heavy in the air. These men had a simple mission: find out what this machine was really made of. Discovery through steel, they started with the basics. The vehicle's chassis was cleanly engineered, typical of German manufacturing. When they opened the hood, they found the Horch V8 engine, a marvel of mechanical precision. Despite dust and heat damage, the internal components were well machined and neatly assembled. The four-wheel steering system drew particular admiration. With a twist of the steering wheel, the rear wheels pivoted in tandem with the front, allowing a turning circle far tighter than any British armored car could achieve. One mechanic, a former car designer from Birmingham, remarked that it was a beautiful piece of engineering for peacetime. Then came the armor inspection. Using depth gauges, they measured the plates. The numbers were shocking: 8 millimeters on the sides, 5 millimeters on the underside and rear, and 14.5 millimeters on the front of this later model, even when factoring in the slope, which effectively thickened the protection by altering impact angles. The steel was startlingly thin. The same Birmingham mechanic ran his hand along the side and said quietly, "I've worked on civilian trucks with thicker panels than this." That statement was not an exaggeration. The first tests, field testing, began informally. They wanted to see for themselves how much punishment the vehicle could take. The first weapons used were small arms, 9mm Webley pistols and Sten submachine guns. At short range, the bullets left dents and shallow craters. Some ricocheted against pistol fire. The armor held, just as German engineers had intended. But pistols were not what the 222 was meant to face. The next test would change everything. A marksman from the infantry detachment produced a Lee Enfield No. .4 rifle, chambered in .303 British. He loaded it first with standard ball ammunition and took aim from 50 yards. The bullet hit the angled armor and left a shallow crater. No penetration. The men nodded. So far, so good. Then he switched to WWII armor, piercing rounds, ammunition designed with a hardened steel core capable of cutting through light armor. At 50 yards, he fired again. The sound was sharper this time, a crack that echoed off the rocks. When they approached the target, they stared in disbelief. A clean hole, entry neat, exit jagged. The bullet had punched straight through the side of the car. They fired again and again. Every shot that struck squarely went through. The crew inside such a vehicle would have had no chance. Word spread quickly through the British 8th Army. The Sd.Kfz, 222 could be killed with a rifle. Repercussions in the field for frontline soldiers, this revelation was empowering. Until that point, many infantrymen had viewed German armored cars as small tanks, fast, dangerous, and untouchable. But now, they learned that with the right ammunition, even a single rifleman could neutralize the threat. Intelligence officers documented the findings in detailed reports. The information was disseminated across units, from infantry platoons to tank regiments. A new kind of psychological balance emerged on the battlefield. German crews, still believing their armor was proof against rifle fire, continued to operate boldly. British patrols, now armed with armor, piercing rounds, waited patiently. When the reconnaissance cars appeared, silhouetted against the sand dunes, riflemen aimed carefully, and the myth of invincibility shattered under the crack of .303 fire. The broader testing campaign, while these improvised tests occurred in the desert, official evaluations took place thousands of kilometers away. Captured vehicles were shipped back to Britain for formal analysis at the School of Tank Technology in Chertsey, Surrey. The facility was part of the British Army's military College of Science and specialized in studying enemy vehicles down to the last bolt and rivet. The process was meticulous. Engineers measured plate thickness, analyzed metallurgical samples, tested engine performance, and even dismantled transmissions to study German gear ratios. The 222's reports filled dozens of pages. Its strengths were noted: mechanical reliability, excellent visibility, high road speed, and superb turning radius. But its weakness, thin armor, overshadowed everything. The results confirmed what the desert tests had already revealed. The Sd.Kfz 222 was, by late war standards, barely armored at all. The boys' rifle and beyond, once the rifle tests concluded, heavier weapons were brought in. The boys' anti-tank rifle, firing a massive 13.9 mm Rev round, blew holes through the 222 with ease. At 100 yards, the projectile could penetrate over 20 millimeters of armor. Against the German car's thin plating, it was complete overkill. The steel shattered and peeled like tin foil. Then came the 2-pounder anti-tank gun, the standard British weapon at the time. Even at 800 yards, its 40 mm shells punched through both sides of the vehicle. There was no contest. The Tu-22, built for reconnaissance, was utterly unsuited for direct combat against even the lightest anti-tank weapons. Tank crews were informed that their own coaxial machine guns, often 7.92 mm or .30 caliber, could penetrate the 222 sides at close range if they concentrated sustained fire on one point. The thin steel would buckle and fail after repeated hits. By early 1942, the information had spread across all Allied forces in North Africa. British, Australian, New Zealander, South African, Indian, and Free French. Everywhere the Tu-22 appeared, soldiers now saw opportunity rather than danger. The myth collapses. What began as a symbol of German efficiency became a case study in flawed doctrine. The Tu-22's vulnerability reflected a deeper problem in German design philosophy, the assumption that reconnaissance units would never need to fight under heavy fire. In practice, battlefields are chaotic. Scouts stumble into ambushes, get cut off, or are ordered to hold ground until reinforcements arrive. Under those circumstances, thin armor was a death sentence. Reports from captured German diaries confirmed the same. Some 222 crews wrote bitterly about British riflemen who seemed to shoot through the walls. Others noted that after the first engagements, veterans began improvising their own protection, hanging sandbags, spare treads, or even steel plates from wrecked trucks over the vulnerable sides. But these makeshift defenses added weight and reduced speed, undermining the vehicle's primary advantage. By mid-1942, as the North African campaign intensified, the Germans were forced to admit that the Sd.Kfz Tu-22 was outdated. Production continued in limited quantities until 1943, but newer designs, such as the Sd.Kfz Tu-34 Puma, began to replace it. The Puma was larger, faster, and better protected, though far more complex and expensive to build. The Tu-22, meanwhile, remained in use only because there were too few replacements. In occupied Europe, it still served as a patrol and convoy escort vehicle. In Russia, it struggled against mud and snow, its four-wheel drive no match for the Eastern Front's brutal terrain. Many were destroyed, abandoned, or cannibalized for spare parts. Influence on Soviet design, ironically, the Tu-22's flaws helped shape its enemies' innovations. When the Soviet Union captured a few examples in 1941, their engineers studied them carefully. One vehicle was sent to the GAZ factory at Gorky for examination. Chief designer Vitaly Grachev admired the vehicle's faceted armor and compact layout. The idea of sharply angled armor plates impressed Soviet engineers who were already experimenting with similar concepts. From that study emerged the BA-64, the Soviet light armored car introduced in 1942. Its hull clearly echoed the German design, with steeply sloped plates intended to maximize deflection. But the Soviets learned from German mistakes. They simplified production, accepted the limitations of thin armor, and made the vehicle as light and inexpensive as possible. The BA-64 weighed half as much as the Tu-22 and could be built in massive numbers using truck components. While still vulnerable to anti-tank fire, the BA-64 fulfilled its purpose efficiently, a disposable scout car in an army that valued numbers and practicality over perfection. The broader lesson in hindsight, the Sd.Kfz Tu-22 was not a failure of engineering, but of expectation. It was designed for a world that no longer existed, a world where wars were fought with maneuvering divisions and clear front lines. The Second World War, especially in North Africa and on the Eastern Front, was anything but predictable. The battlefield punished overconfidence mercilessly. The German military's belief that reconnaissance vehicles could avoid direct contact was naive. When the Tu-22 met reality, when dust, distance, and desert rifles entered the equation, its armor proved as fragile as paper. Even so, the vehicle's legacy endured. Its angular design inspired future armored car development around the world. It represented an evolutionary step between interwar concepts and modern reconnaissance vehicles, but it also served as a cautionary tale, proof that no amount of propaganda or theory could make thin steel invincible. Epilogue: steel and sand by 1943. Most surviving Sd.Kfz 222s in North Africa had been destroyed or abandoned. The desert reclaimed their remains. Some were buried in sand, others stripped for parts. A few still sit today in the Libyan and Egyptian deserts, rusted, silent shells marking the graves of forgotten crews who once trusted their armor to save them. In museums, preserved examples gleam under fluorescent lights, their sharp lines still elegant. Visitors often marvel at their futuristic appearance, unaware that beneath the angled plates lies only a few millimeters of steel, a reminder that what looks strong is not always so. Back in 1941, when those British mechanics first fired their rifles into a captured vehicle, they weren't conducting a grand scientific test. They were simply curious soldiers trying to understand their enemy. Yet their discovery reshaped battlefield tactics, undermined German confidence, and exposed one of the most striking paradoxes of the war, that the weapons of the modern age, for all their complexity and speed, could still fall to something as simple as a well-aimed rifle shot. The Sd.Kfz 222 began as a symbol of German engineering might. It ended as proof that even the best machines, when built on flawed assumptions, could not withstand the truth of combat. When Soviet designers began producing the BA-64, their approach to armored car construction reflected an entirely different philosophy than the one used by Germany. The Soviet Union, unlike its Axis counterpart, never aimed for mechanical perfection. It aimed for numbers. Factories were instructed to produce as many serviceable machines as possible, as quickly as possible, using existing components and infrastructure. This philosophy shaped not only the BA-64, but much of Soviet wartime production. Manufacturing efficiency and scale, the BA-64 was built on the GAZ-64 Jeep chassis, utilizing the same assembly lines, parts, and even many of the same workers. This allowed Soviet production to ramp up rapidly without the delays associated with specialized tooling or precision engineering. The result was a vehicle that could be produced by the thousands without disrupting the manufacture of other vital military equipment. From 1946, approximately 1 in 10 BA-64 variants, about 900 early models of BA-64 between 1942 and 1943, and roughly 200 improved BA-64B models between 1943 and 1946. By comparison, German industry produced fewer than 1,000 Sd.Kfz 222s over 6 years. This dramatic contrast illustrates how the Soviet emphasis on simplicity and scalability outperformed the German focus on mechanical sophistication. Soviet vehicles rolled off assembly lines that prioritized continuity of production over innovation. Once a design worked well enough, it was frozen in place. Factories were told not to modify or overcomplicate it. This principle allowed massive output, a cornerstone of the Soviet war, machine that overwhelmed Axis forces through attrition. Divergent philosophies: German engineers valued technical excellence, crafting vehicles that often bordered on over-engineered. Precise, efficient, but difficult to mass-produce. The Sd.Kfz 222, for instance, featured 4-wheel steering and carefully sloped armor plates. Such design sophistication, while impressive, required time, specialized labor, and materials increasingly scarce by mid-war. The Soviet approach, by contrast, was brutally pragmatic. The BA-64 lacked the refinement of its German counterpart. Its armor was thin and its interior cramped, but it worked. It could be built quickly, repaired in the field, and replaced without difficulty. Soviet strategists accepted its limitations because what mattered was quantity, not perfection. Britain, for its part, took a third path. British designers sought balance. Vehicles that could be mass-produced efficiently, yet offered genuine protection and firepower. The Daimler and Humber armored cars embodied this middle ground. Entering service in 1941, the Daimler featured 16 mm side armor and 30 mm front armor, thick enough to resist rifle fire and even some armor-piercing rounds. Its 2-pounder anti-tank gun far outclassed the 20 mm autocan of the German Sd.Kfz 222. Each nation's philosophy reflected its strategic and industrial realities. Germany valued engineering precision but sacrificed scalability. Britain sought balanced designs for sustained campaigns. The Soviet Union prioritized speed of manufacture and numerical dominance. Combat lessons. Combat quickly revealed the strengths and weaknesses of each approach. The Sd.Kfz 222, initially dominant in early campaigns like France and Poland, began showing vulnerabilities once the Allies fielded armor-piercing rifle ammunition. Meanwhile, the British Daimler proved durable in North Africa and Europe, while the Soviet BA-64 excelled in reconnaissance and convoy roles where its light armor was less of a liability. American forces, entering the North African campaign in late 1942, soon encountered captured Sd.Kfz 222s and conducted their own testing. U.S. ordnance experts, known for scientific precision, performed systematic ballistic and performance evaluations to better understand German technology and provide tactical intelligence to field units. American ballistics testing began with the standard M9-033 Springfield rifle and the newer M1 Garand, both firing the 30-06 Springfield cartridge. When loaded with M2 armor-piercing ammunition, identified by its black bullet tip, the rifles easily defeated the 8 mm side armor of the Sd.Kfz 222 at 100 yards. The M2 round was rated to penetrate 10.67 mm of steel at 100 yards, though field tests recorded results exceeding 12 mm, far surpassing the German car's actual protection. The M1 Garand's semi-automatic action provided an additional advantage. Soldiers could fire multiple shots rapidly without losing sight alignment, making it lethal against lightly armored vehicles. The findings were unequivocal. American infantry armed with standard service rifles and armor-piercing ammunition could destroy Sd.Kfz 222 under realistic combat conditions. These results were circulated among U.S. units preparing for the Tunisia campaign, bolstering soldier confidence and shaping infantry tactics. Submachine guns and carbines further testing explored the capabilities of smaller weapons. The Thompson submachine gun, firing the .45 ACP cartridge, lacked the velocity to pierce armor except at point-blank range with multiple hits in the same spot. The M1 carbine, chambered for the lighter .30 carbine round, offered slightly better penetration, but still proved ineffective beyond 50 yards. In contrast, the .30-06 M2 armor-piercing round consistently penetrated the 8 mm plates, demonstrating that rifle caliber AP ammunition, not submachine gun or pistol rounds, represented the real threat to German armored cars. These results matched earlier British and Soviet conclusions. Standard ball ammunition posed little danger, but hardened core AP rounds could slice through light armor like paper. Ammunition and distribution, however, not all troops carried AP ammunition routinely. Most infantry soldiers were issued standard ball cartridges, with armor-piercing rounds distributed selectively, typically to squad leaders, marksmen, or anti-tank riflemen. When intelligence suggested that enemy armored cars were operating nearby, commanders would allocate additional AP rounds. The difference between these two ammunition types, lead core vs. steel core, was crucial. In practice, the Sd.Kfz 222 could survive engagements with ordinary rifle fire, but fail catastrophically when struck by dedicated AP ammunition, particularly at close range or from advantageous angles. The geometry of protection German engineers had designed the Sd.Kfz 222's armor with sharp angles to increase effective thickness and encourage ricochets. A bullet striking a plate at a 6-degree angle from perpendicular traveled through much more metal than a direct shot, theoretically making the 8 mm armor behave like 12 or even 15 mm. But in real combat, these ideal impact conditions were rare. The vehicle's flatter side and rear panels were often exposed when maneuvering, allowing enemy fire to strike perpendicularly. Moreover, when the car pivoted to face threats or reverse direction, its vulnerable sides became easy targets. As a result, despite its clever geometry, the Sd.Kfz 222's thin armor and predictable movement patterns rendered it highly vulnerable once enemy forces understood its design. Widespread recognition of weakness. By late 1942, the vehicle's vulnerability was no longer a secret. Reports from multiple Allied and Axis theaters, North Africa, the Eastern Front, Italy, and later France, documented the same issue. Riflemen equipped with AP ammunition could kill Sd.Kfz 222 crews. The vehicle that had performed admirably in early war blitzkrieg operations was now obsolete. The technology of 1938, once sufficient for reconnaissance in Poland or France, had become a liability by 1943 in the face of modern infantry weaponry. German response. The Puma German command recognized the problem early in 1942. Combat reports from both Africa and Russia described catastrophic losses of light armored cars to rifle and machine gunfire. Commanders requested a new vehicle, one that could withstand small arms fire and light anti-tank weapons. The result was the Kfz 234 Puma, an 8-wheeled armored car that corrected nearly every shortcoming of its predecessor. Featuring 30 mm frontal armor and 14.5 mm on the sides and rear, the Puma could resist most rifle caliber ammunition and even survive hits from light anti-tank weapons. Its 5cm Kep K39 LX60 gun, identical to that used on later Panzer III tanks, gave reconnaissance units real offensive capability for the first time. Powered by a 12-cylinder Tatra diesel engine, the Puma achieved speeds up to 85 km/h on roads and maintained excellent cross-country performance. It carried a crew of 4, offering more space, better communication equipment, and significantly improved survivability. However, the Puma's arrival was far too late. The first production models didn't reach the front until late 1943, by which time Germany was reeling from defeats on multiple fronts and suffering crippling industrial shortages. Only around 400 vehicles were ever produced before Allied bombing and raw material scarcity halted production in 1944. The end of the Sd.Kfz. The Sd.Kfz 222 itself remained in production until late 1943, with a total of roughly 990 vehicles built between 1937 and 1943. Early models carried 8 mm armor all around and a 3.5-liter Horch engine producing 75 horsepower. A mid-production upgrade in 1939 increased the frontal armor to 14.5 mm, a modest improvement that still failed to address the side vulnerability. The final AS-B variant introduced in 1942 featured a 3.8-liter engine producing 90 horsepower and an upgraded 20 mm KOK-38 autocannon. Its 30 mm frontal plate finally offered protection against rifle fire from the front, but the unchanged 8 mm sides meant the same fatal flaw persisted. Variants like Kfz 223 and command versions 262 or 261 shared identical structural weaknesses. Even as late as 1944, many 222s remained in front line reconnaissance units simply because there were no replacements. Despite its growing obsolescence, the Sd.Kfz 222 continued to serve on all major fronts through 1944. German field units adapted tactics to mitigate its vulnerabilities. Crews were instructed to operate from covered positions, using terrain and distance rather than armor for protection. The car's speed and maneuverability became its only defense. It excelled in roles requiring rapid movement, convoy escort, scouting, and liaison duties. Where enemy fire was unlikely or could be avoided through speed, commanders learned to pair the 222 with heavier elements. In reconnaissance battalions, it often operated alongside Sd.Kfz Tu-131s or Tu-34 Pumas, using its superior speed to probe ahead, while heavier vehicles followed to provide covering fire. But as the war turned defensive for Germany, reconnaissance missions grew suicidal. The once prized mobility of the Tu-22 offered little advantage against Allied air power, artillery, and ambushes by infantry armed with armor-piercing rounds or bazookas. Combat realities in the field. By 1943, Allied air superiority rendered German armored cars especially vulnerable. Fighter bombers such as the P-47 Thunderbolt and Hawker Typhoon hunted German convoys relentlessly, and the thinly armored Tu-122 offered no protection against strafing attacks. Photographs from retreating columns show rows of destroyed reconnaissance vehicles, their open turrets blackened by fire, tires shredded by shrapnel. Crews often spoke of the Tu-22 with mixed feelings: admiration for its speed and handling, frustration at its fragility. Many veterans described it as a metal coffin, effective only until it was seen by the enemy. Still, for reconnaissance soldiers who had no choice but to venture into dangerous territory, it represented a balance between agility and firepower, a compromise that reflected Germany's evolving desperation. Soviet and Allied counterparts. Meanwhile, the Soviet BA-64 continued production and remained in service until 1946. Though crude, it filled its intended role effectively. The BA-64's four-wheel drive, lightweight frame, and small profile allowed it to navigate muddy roads and forest tracks where heavier vehicles bogged down. Soviet crews valued it for reliability, not comfort. It could climb steep gradients, cross shallow rivers, and survive extreme cold, something German vehicles often could not. The British Daimler and Humber armored cars dominated Western Allied reconnaissance forces. They carried heavier weapons, including the 2-pounder or even the 6-pounder anti-tank guns, and were fast, with top speeds exceeding 80 km/h. Their armor, up to 30 mm, rendered them nearly immune to small arms fire. These British designs would remain in service well into the post-war years, their rugged simplicity and firepower making them adaptable to colonial policing and early Cold War duties. Comparative analysis, a detailed post-war analysis conducted by Allied technical experts in 1946, compared several armored car designs: German Sd.Kfz, Tu-122 and Tu-134, British Daimler, American MA Greyhound, and Soviet BA-64. The study, archived by the British Ministry of Supply, concluded the following: the Sd.Kfz Tu-22 was the most technically refined of early war designs, but became obsolete fastest. The Sd.Kfz Tu-34 Puma represented the best balanced German effort, but was too complex and too late. The Daimler and Humber achieved the best combat survivability to cost ratio. The MA Greyhound was efficient but under-armored, a problem shared with the Tu-22. The BA-64, though the least comfortable, was the most economical to produce and maintain. The report concluded with an observation that summarized the war's industrial lesson: victory does not belong to the engineer who perfects the machine, but to the nation that perfects the means of making it. Design, evolution, and influence. The Sd.Kfz Tu-122 nonetheless left a lasting design legacy. Its open-top turret with mesh cover inspired several post-war armored scout vehicles. The principle of using sloped armor to maximize protection without adding weight became a standard practice in both East and West. Even the concept of four-wheel drive reconnaissance vehicles with autocannons resurfaced in NATO and Warsaw Pact doctrine during the Cold War. In the 1950s, France's Panhard EBR and the Soviet T-BRDM-2 echoed the Tu-22's philosophy: light, fast, armed with rapid-firing weapons, and intended for deep reconnaissance. These designs, though vastly improved in protection and technology, carried the conceptual DNA of interwar German experimentation. Tactical employment lessons. The German Army's early war doctrine, Ockel-Rung reconnaissance in force, relied heavily on speed and initiative. The Sd.Kfz 222 fit perfectly into this doctrine during the Blitzkrieg years. It could move rapidly ahead of armored divisions, identify enemy positions, and engage soft targets. Its 20-mm autocannon was more than sufficient for lightly armored opponents in 1939-1941. However, as the war evolved, so did the battlefield environment. By 1943, reconnaissance no longer meant unopposed movement through enemy territory. It meant advancing into hostile zones saturated with anti-tank weapons, mines, and ambushes. The 222, once a hunter, became the hunted. German tactical manuals were revised accordingly. Crews were told to use terrain, smoke, and radio coordination rather than direct visual scouting. Reconnaissance increasingly relied on stealth and intelligence gathering rather than armored speed. The 222's design, rooted in early war mobility doctrine, simply could not adapt to the new reality of total firepower saturation. Decline and withdrawal by mid-1944. Most surviving Sd.Kfz 222s had been relegated to training schools, rear area security, or anti-partisan operations in occupied territories. In these roles, its weaknesses mattered less and its mobility remained valuable. Some were converted into command vehicles by removing the turret to make space for additional radios. Others were stripped down entirely and used as armored transport, the last recorded operational use of the Sd.Kfz. 222 occurred in May 1945 during scattered defensive actions in Austria and Czechoslovakia. A handful of vehicles, abandoned or captured, were later pressed into service by Soviet, Czech, and Yugoslav units for police duties. By 1947, nearly all remaining vehicles had been scrapped or relegated to museum displays. Survivors in restoration today, fewer than 20 authentic Sd.Kfz 222s survive worldwide. A small number are on display in museums, such as the Bovington Tank Museum in England, the Deutsches Panzer Museum in Munster, and the Kubinka Tank Museum near Moscow. Most examples are post-war reconstructions or hybrids using chassis from related Horch vehicles. Collectors prize the 222 for its compact size, distinctive turret, and historical significance as a symbol of early mechanized warfare. Restorations are challenging due to the scarcity of original parts. Enthusiasts often fabricate new armor plates, engines, and suspension components based on wartime blueprints. The surviving examples, when operational, offer a visceral sense of the war's engineering contrast. A machine both elegant and fatally flawed. Watching one in motion reveals its contradictions, light yet aggressive, efficient yet fragile. The human perspective for the men who crewed the Sd.Kfz 222, life inside was cramped and perilous. The two-man crew, a driver and a gunner commander, operated in tight quarters under constant threat. The open top turret, while providing good visibility, left them exposed to grenades, shrapnel, and the elements. Veteran accounts describe long patrols through mud, dust, or snow with the roar of the Horch engine reverberating inside the hull. Communication was difficult, radio equipment was unreliable, and the thin armor amplified every sound of enemy fire. Crews learned to recognize the distinct ping of armor-piercing rounds striking their vehicle, a sound every soldier dreaded. Survivors often spoke with grudging respect for the 222's reliability and speed, but admitted that morale suffered once its vulnerability became known. "You never forgot that one good shot could finish you," recalled a veteran of the 7th Panzer Division in his post-war memoir. "It was like going to war in a tin can with a machine gun." The broader industrial lesson, the story of the Sd.Kfz 222 mirrors Germany's wartime industrial struggle. In the late 1930s, the nation led the world in mechanical innovation, but it failed to match the industrial volume of its enemies. By investing heavily in complexity, high-performance engines, intricate suspension systems, precision machining, German engineers produced brilliant machines that could not be replaced fast enough. In contrast, The Allied powers, particularly the United States and the Soviet Union, mastered the art of industrial simplification. They optimized production lines, standardized components, and trained less specialized workers to build functional, good enough machines in staggering numbers. The Sd.Kfz. Tu-22 thus became an emblem of the German dilemma: superior design undermined by unsustainable production philosophy. It performed excellently in small numbers but failed to shape the outcome of a war that demanded mass over mastery. Post-war influence on vehicle doctrine. In the decades following the war, military thinkers studied the lessons of vehicles like the Sd.Kfz. 222 to redefine reconnaissance tactics. The Cold War era emphasized observation without engagement. Recon units were no longer expected to fight their way forward, but to observe, report, and withdraw if discovered. This shift led to the development of armored reconnaissance vehicles equipped with sensors, communication arrays, and later, night vision systems, technologies unimaginable in 1939. The spirit of the Sd.Kfz 222 lived on, not in its armor or weaponry, but in the enduring idea that information, not armor thickness, determines victory. Restoration of memory. Modern historians now view the Sd.Kfz 222 as more than a weapon. It represents a microcosm of an era obsessed with technological dominance. It reminds us how innovation, when disconnected from strategic and economic reality, can become a weakness. Yet it also stands as a testament to human ingenuity, a machine conceived in the optimism of the early mechanized age, refined by experience, and ultimately overtaken by history. At reenactments and historical exhibitions, restored Sd.Kfz 222s often draw fascination from audiences. The vehicle's angular design, sloped armor, and rotating turret give it a distinctly futuristic appearance, even decades after its time. Its sound, the distinct growl of the V8 Horch engine, connects modern observers with a vanished world of mechanical ambition. Technical specifications, final model OS, B specification, detail, manufacturer Horch, Auto Union AG production years, 1937-1943, total produced approx. 990 crew 2 driver. Gunner commander, weight 4.8 tons, engine Horch V8 3.8L. 90 AP transmission, 4x4 with 4-wheel steering, maximum speed 80 km/h, road operational range 300 km, primary armament 20 mm KK-38, autocannon, secondary armament 2.92, mono MG 34, machine gun armor 514.5 mm angled plates, frontal armors, lady 30 mm on OS. B armament elevation 7 degrees to the 80 degrees IA capable. These specifications reveal how the 222 straddled the line between car and tank, lightly built yet equipped for both air defense and ground combat. Its versatility was impressive for its size, though insufficient to meet the demands of mid-war battlefields. Epilogue: lessons from steel and fire. Every armored vehicle of World War II tells a story of design compromises, battlefield improvisation, and the human struggle to survive inside machines built for destruction. This Sd.Kfz 222 story is particularly poignant because it embodies both brilliance and futility. It was a weapon of the early war when maneuver and surprise defined victory. As the conflict evolved into a test of endurance and firepower, the 222's virtues turned into liabilities. Its open turret, once a symbol of flexibility, became an invitation to death. Its thin armor, once acceptable, became obsolete. And yet in its time, it represented the cutting edge of a new kind of warfare, mobile, fast, and precise. From the deserts of North Africa to the forests of the Eastern Front, from the cold of the Ardennes to the ruins of Berlin, the Sd.Kfz 222 bore witness to every phase of the war's transformation. Its fragments, scattered across Europe and preserved in museums, remain silent teachers of history, reminders that technology, no matter how advanced, cannot escape the logic of time and progress. In the end, the Sd.Kfz 222 was not defeated by an enemy gun, but by evolution itself, by the advance of it as a symbol of a relentless German modernity and warfare ended, and as a relic industrial of lessons, revolutions learned in unleashed. Steel smoke began an fire